The last time I saw my grandchildren, my 8-year-old grandson Josh had just lost his first tooth. He was so proud, tucking a little note for the toothberry under his pillow. My granddaughter Emily, who is 10 and far too sophisticated for such things, rolled her eyes but then whispered to me, "Grandma, I put an extra dollar under his pillow for me, don't tell." That was 6 months ago. The day before, my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, looked me dead in the eye, her manicured finger pointing at the family photos on my mantle, and told me that if I didn't hand over half of my late husband's estate, those pictures would be the closest I'd ever get to my grandchildren again. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Now, let me start at the beginning. My husband, Frank, was the quietest, most brilliant man I've ever known. For 42 years, he was my rock. He was a mechanical engineer, a man who could fix anything with a bit of wire and a whole lot of patience. We didn't live a flashy life. We had a comfortable 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet Ohio suburb, 2 reasonably priced cars, and we took a vacation to Myrtle Beach every other summer. Our son, Mark, was our whole world. We raised him to be kind, respectful, and hardworking. And he was, for the most part. Then, in his last year of college, he met Tiffany. From the start, something about Tiffany just grated. She was polished and perfect, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She came from a family with new money, and she wore it like a costume. She'd walk into our home, a place filled with handmade quilts and photos of Mark's awkward school years, and her eyes would scan everything with this faint air of disapproval. She'd compliment my pot roast by saying, "It's so rustic," as if it were a log cabin she was forced to eat. Frank saw it right away. He'd just squeeze my hand and give me a little look that said, "I see it too, let's just be polite." Mark was smitten, completely blinded by her. He started dressing differently, talking differently. Suddenly, the local diners he and Frank loved weren't good enough. It was all about places with entrees you couldn't pronounce and wine lists longer than a Stephen King novel. When they got engaged, we were happy for him because we loved him, but we had our reservations. Tiffany planned a wedding that cost more than our first car and my college education combined. Frank wrote the check without a word. But that night, he sat at his workbench in the garage for a long time, just tinkering. That's what he did when he was thinking. When Emily and then Josh were born, it was like a new sun had risen in my world. Holding them, I was just grandma, and nothing else mattered. I saw them every week. I'd bake cookies with Emily, letting her make a glorious mess with the flour, and I'd build impossibly tall Lego towers with Josh just to watch him giggle when they all came crashing down. For those few hours, even Tiffany's tight, forced smiles seemed to soften. Those kids were the glue holding our strained little family together. I thought, for their sake, we could make this work. We could be one of those families that agrees to disagree, bound by a shared love for the children. Then Frank got sick. It was fast and it was brutal. A cancer that came out of nowhere and stole him from me within a year. Mark was devastated, of course. Tiffany was, well, she was a perfect picture of a concerned daughter-in-law. She brought casseroles, store-bought, of course, and offered 1,000 let-me-knows if you need anythings. But I saw the way her eyes darted around the house, the way she'd ask little questions. Does Frank have a good pension? Did you all ever get that antique clock appraised? It was like she was a vulture circling, waiting. I was too wrapped in grief to pay her much mind. My only focus was on holding Frank's hand and cherishing every last moment. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The funeral was a blur. After everyone left and the last sympathy dish was put away, the house was silent for the first time in 4 decades. A week later, we were all in a stuffy lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I sat there, numb, clutching my son's hand. Tiffany was on his other side, wearing a black dress that was just a little too chic for the occasion. The lawyer, Mr. Davidson, cleared his throat. He went through the expected things first. The house was left to me, free and clear. our modest savings, our IRAs, all to me. Frank's car went to Mark. Tiffany shifted in her chair, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. She thought that was it. The grand total was a nice, comfortable nest egg for a widow, but certainly not the jackpot she had been hoping for.
And that, Mr. Davidson said, peering over his glasses, brings us to the remainder of the estate, Frank's portfolio. Mark looked confused. Portfolio? Dad didn't play the stock market. Tiffany scoffed lightly, a little puff of air. He probably had a few shares of Ford from his grandfather or something. Mr. Davidson smiled a slow, deliberate smile. Not exactly. It seems, for the better part of 30 years, Frank was a quiet inventor. He turned a page. In the late 1980s, he patented a specific type of self-lubricating bearing and a new kind of high-efficiency thermal gasket. They weren't groundbreaking at the time. He sold the designs to a few small industrial suppliers for a pittance up front. But, and this is the genius of your father, he retained a small percentage of the licensing rights in perpetuity. My mind was reeling. I knew Frank was always tinkering, always sketching designs on napkins. He called it his doodling. He never told me he'd patented anything. Mr. Davidson continued. For decades, those royalties amounted to very little, a few $100s a year, maybe. But about 15 years ago, a new aerospace company and a major green energy firm began using technology that incorporated those very patents. As their industries exploded, so did the value of Frank's intellectual property. He took off his glasses and looked directly at me. Eleanor, your husband was a very wealthy man. After calculating the current value of the licensing agreements and the associated investment accounts he funded with them, Frank's portfolio is currently valued at just over $14 million. The silence in the room was absolute. I felt the air leave my lungs. Mark's jaw was literally hanging open. But Tiffany? I turned to look at her, and the mask was gone. The polite, sympathetic daughter-in-law had vanished. In her place was a woman with eyes wide open with a terrifying, calculating greed. There was no joy for me, no shock at Frank's secret genius. There was only the cold, hard math of a dollar sign. She looked at me, then at the lawyer, then back at me. Her lips parted, and I saw for the very first time the piranha she'd been hiding behind that perfect smile. The battle had begun, and I was entirely unprepared. The first move came 3 days later. A phone call from Mark. Mom, hey, Tiffany and I have been talking, and we have a really great idea. He sounded nervous, coached. He launched into a rambling pitch about a luxury lifestyle brand Tiffany wanted to start, something about artisanal dog collars and gluten-free cat treats. The bottom line was they needed a seed investor. The ask? $2 million. Mark, honey, I said, my voice gentle but firm, the lawyer hasn't even finalized the paperwork. I haven't had a moment to breathe, let alone think about investments. Yeah, but Tiff says these opportunities don't wait. I could hear her whispering in the background. I cut him off. The answer is no, not right now. This is Frank's legacy. I need to be careful. The line went quiet for a moment. Then I heard Tiffany's sharp voice, clear as a bell. For God's sake, Mark, just ask her properly. The phone was snatched away. Eleanor, let's not play games. Frank wouldn't want you sitting on all that money. He would want it to benefit his family, his son, his grandchildren. The emphasis was not lost on me. I am his family, Tiffany, and this money will benefit everyone in time, but it will be done thoughtfully, I said, my back stiffening. Fine, be a selfish old woman, she spat, and the line went dead. That was the last civil word she spoke to me. The next weekend, when I called to arrange my weekly visit with Emily and Josh, Mark answered. He said the kids were busy. The next week, they had the flu. The week after that, they were at a friend's birthday party I somehow had not been told about. Finally, after a month of excuses, Tiffany herself got on the phone, and that's when she laid it all out, the cold, cruel transaction she had devised, the joy of being a grandmother in exchange for a wire transfer. My love for my grandbabies had been appraised, and Tiffany had set the price. I sat there holding the dead phone to my ear, the dial tone a shrill, mocking sound in the quiet kitchen. The first emotion wasn't anger, not yet. It was a deep, cavernous ache, the same one I'd felt when the doctor had given us Frank's diagnosis. It was the feeling of something precious being stolen from you, piece by piece. She had put a price tag on my grandbaby's hugs. She had monetized their sloppy kisses and the smell of their hair. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the refrigerator, at the lopsided, crayon-drawn picture of a unicorn Emily had made for me, its single horn taped back on. My knees felt weak, and I had to grip the counter from keeping from buckling. The days that followed were a special kind of awful. A thick, soupy quiet filled the house, a silence so profound it felt like a presence. Every time I passed the guest room where the kids had their sleepovers, my heart would clench. I saw Josh's little blue dinosaur pajamas folded on the shelf and Emily's worn copy of Harriet the Spy on the nightstand. These weren't just objects, they were ghosts. I tried calling Mark's cell, desperate to speak to him alone. Most of the time he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was strained, distant. "Mom, it's not a good time."
Mark, we need to talk about this, about your wife. Tiffany is just trying to secure our family's future, he recited, the words sounding hollow and foreign in his mouth. She thinks you're not seeing the big picture. This is a chance for us, for the kids, to have a life we could only dream of. What about the life we had? I pleaded, my voice cracking. Does that mean nothing? Frank and I worked our whole lives to give you a good start. This money, this is different. It's a responsibility. It's not a lottery ticket. Look, I have to go. Just think about her offer, Mom. It's the easiest way to make all of this go away. He didn't say, or else, but the threat hung in the air between us, thicker than summer humidity. He had chosen. He had picked his wife's ambition over his mother's heart. I hung up the phone feeling colder than I had in my entire life. I had lost my husband, and now, it seemed, I had lost my son, too. I cried for 3 straight days. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I sat in Frank's favorite recliner, wrapped myself in the afghan my own mother had knitted, and I mourned, not just for Frank, but for the family I thought I had. On the 4th day, my best friend Carol let herself in with the key I'd given her 30 years ago. She found me still in my bathrobe, staring at a blank television screen. Carol is one of those women who is perpetually caffeinated and pathologically incapable of mincing words. She took one look at me, went to the kitchen, and came back with 2 mugs of coffee so strong you could stand a spoon up in them. "All right, Eleanor, that's enough," she said, handing me a mug. "You've grieved. Now it's time to get angry." "I'm just so tired," I whispered. "I know you are, but you are not the woman who lets a bleached blonde piranha in high heels chew you up and spit you out. Frank wouldn't stand for it, and neither will I." She sat on the ottoman across from me. "What exactly is your plan?" "I don't have one," I confessed. "I thought about calling Mr. Davidson, the lawyer, but what can he do? It's not illegal to be a horrible person." "No," Carol agreed, taking a sip of coffee. "But it's often very expensive. That woman's entire life is built on appearances. What do you really know about her?" I thought about it. Not much. She says her family is in import-export. They live in one of those huge new developments a few towns over. She talks a big game, but the details are always fuzzy. "Well, there you go," Carol said, her eyes glinting. "Frank was a genius at taking things apart to see how they worked. Maybe it's time you took a page from his book and did a little dismantling of your own." Her words lit a tiny pilot light in the cold furnace of my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Anger. Hot, righteous anger. She was right. I was Frank's wife, not some wilting flower.
I was a woman who had managed a household budget down to the penny for 40 years, who had raised a son, who had navigated hospital bureaucracies, and stood by my husband's side until the very end. I was stronger than Tiffany gave me credit for. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness. It was a mistake she was going to regret. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. That night, after Carol left, I didn't turn on the TV. I went into Frank's old office, a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to clean out yet. His schematics were still on his drafting table. His worn-out engineering textbooks lined the shelves. The air still smelled faintly of him, of graphite and old paper. I sat down at his big oak desk, opened my laptop, and started to work. My first search was simple: Tiffany's maiden name and her parents' names. I knew them from the wedding invitation. It didn't take long to find them. Her father, Gerald, was listed as the president of a company called Sterling Imports LLC. It sounded impressive. The website was glossy and professional, full of stock photos of cargo ships and talk of global logistics solutions. But when I looked for news articles, there was very little. For a successful international company, they had a surprisingly small digital footprint. Strange. I kept digging, falling down one rabbit hole after another. I'm pretty handy with a computer. Frank always insisted we keep up with the times. But this was different. I was hunting. For 2 days, I did nothing but drink coffee and search. I learned how to look up public records, court filings, and archive news articles. Most of what I found was boring. Property deeds, traffic violations. But then, on the third night, around 2 a.m, I finally found it. It wasn't on the first or second or even 10th page of Google. It was buried in the digital archives of a small local newspaper from a neighboring state, dated 7 years ago. The headline was small: "Local businessman fined in consumer protection lawsuit." The businessman was Gerald, Tiffany's father. His company at the time, which had a different name, had been sued by the state's attorney general. They were accused of importing counterfeit designer handbags from China and passing them off as the real deal, complete with fake certification documents. They settled out of court, paid a hefty fine, and dissolved the company. 6 months later, Sterling Imports LLC was born. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a significant crack in the perfect, polished facade of Tiffany's life. Her family wasn't old money or even respectable new money. I sat back in Frank's worn leather chair and felt a slow smile spread across my face. Tiffany's power was built on a foundation of lies. The lie that she was from a better class, that she was inherently superior, that she held all the cards. I had just found the name of the man who'd laid the shoddy groundwork for her entire life. This changed things. I wasn't just a grieving widow with a checkbook anymore. I was a woman with a secret. Her secret. And I was just getting started. I made a new folder on my desktop and named it The Tiffany Project. The feeling was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. It was the feeling of taking back control. The discovery about Tiffany's father was like finding the loose thread on a cheap sweater. I knew if I pulled it, the whole ugly thing might unravel. My grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, was beginning to transform into fuel. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. By day, I was Eleanor, the quiet widow. I tended my garden, went to my weekly book club, and made polite, sad conversation at the grocery store. But by night, I was a detective. Frank's office became my command center. I bought a second monitor, a better printer, and a paper shredder. I learned about VPNs and secure browsers, feeling like a character in one of those spy movies Frank loved. Carol would come over with takeout, and we'd strategize like two generals planning a campaign. She was my sounding board, my reality check, and my biggest cheerleader. "So her daddy's a crook," Carol said one night, munching on a spring roll. "That explains where she gets it from. Apple, tree, you know the drill. What's next?" "I need more than that," I said, pointing my chopsticks at the screen. "A 7-year-old lawsuit isn't enough. She'll just dismiss it as old news, a business misunderstanding. I need something current. I need leverage that affects her now." I turned my attention to Tiffany herself. What did I really know about her? She claimed she graduated magna cum laude from a prestigious university with a degree in marketing. She worked for a couple of years at a high-end PR firm in the city before retiring to become a stay-at-home mom. It all sounded so perfect, too perfect. I started with the university. I found an online alumni portal. Getting in required a student ID number, which I didn't have. But I'm a child of the era before everything was digital. I picked up the phone. Posing as a prospective donor doing due diligence for a new scholarship fund, I called the registrar's office. I put on my sweetest, most grandmotherly voice. "Oh dear, I'm looking to honor a particularly bright young alumna," I chirped to the young woman who answered. Her name was Tiffany Maxwell. She would have graduated around, 2010, with a marketing degree. A real star, I heard. There was a clacking of keys, a long pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the woman said. "I have no record of a Tiffany Maxwell graduating from our marketing program. I do show she was enrolled for 2 semesters as a general studies major, but her transcript shows she withdrew due to poor academic standing." Bingo. The lie wasn't just a little white lie. It was a complete fabrication of her entire academic history. She hadn't just embellished her grades, she'd flunked out. The PR firm she supposedly worked at, I called their HR department, pretending to be a background check company. No, they had no record of a Tiffany Maxwell ever being an employee. Perhaps she was an intern. Another dead end. Her entire professional resume was a fantasy. My Tiffany Project folder was getting fuller. Each document I saved, the court filing against her father, the screenshot of her dismal college record, the email confirming she never worked where she said she did, was a brick in the wall I was building. But I still didn't know how to use it. A direct confrontation felt wrong. She'd just deny everything, call me a crazy old woman, and use it as further justification to keep the children from me. No. My approach needed to be as subtle and clever as Frank designing one of his gaskets. The revenge couldn't be loud and messy. It needed to be precise, elegant, and undeniable. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. The key, I realized, wasn't to expose Tiffany to me. I already knew she was a liar and a monster. The key was to expose her to the one person who mattered most, my son. Mark loved her. He believed in her. He saw her as this sophisticated, brilliant woman who had elevated his life. If I just dumped a pile of evidence on his lap, his immediate instinct would be to defend her. He'd see it as an attack. I had to let him discover the truth for himself. I had to create a situation where Tiffany's carefully constructed world would crumble under its own weight. And then I got a bit of luck. An email from Emily's school forwarded from Mark's account. He'd forgotten to remove me from the parent listserv. The annual school fundraiser and gala was coming up for a month. It was the biggest social event of the year for the parents. A catered dinner, a silent auction, and a keynote address. And this year, the head of the event planning committee had stepped down. They were looking for a volunteer to take her place. Tiffany lived for this stuff. Being the gala chair would be a massive status symbol. She could swan around, delegating tasks, schmoozing with the wealthy parents, solidifying her place at the top of their little suburban food chain. I knew with absolute certainty she would volunteer. My plan began to form. It was audacious, a little bit terrifying, and absolutely perfect. It would require perfect timing and a fair bit of Frank's money, but I wasn't trying to buy my grandchildren back. I was investing in the truth.
I called Mr. Davidson, the lawyer. "Mr. Davidson, I have a somewhat unusual request," I began. "I'd like to make a significant anonymous donation to my granddaughter's school." "That's very generous, Eleanor. How much are we talking about?" $500,000, I said, the number feeling huge and powerful on my tongue. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "My word," he finally managed. "That would make you their largest single donor in the school's history." "Precisely," I said. But there are conditions. 2 of them. First, the donation must be made in the name of a new charitable trust. Let's call it the Franklin Memorial Education Trust. Second, and this is the most important part, the donation is to be a matching grant. I will donate my $500,000 if and only if the school's annual gala raises $100,000 on its own. If they fall short, they get nothing. Mr. Davidson was sharp. He caught on immediately. You're putting an incredible amount of pressure on the event organizer. The new event organizer is going to be my daughter-in-law. I want to see just how good she is at marketing. He chuckled softly. Eleanor, your husband was a brilliant man. I see now it runs in the family. Consider it done. The trap was set. The school, of course, accepted the offer with glee. A potential $500,000 windfall was unheard of. 2 days later, another email from the school went out, announcing the incredible, transformative Franklin Memorial Education Trust matching grant. It laid out the terms clearly: raise $100,000 at the gala and unlock a gift of $500,000. And, as a little footnote, it congratulated the new gala chair who had so generously volunteered her time and expertise, Mrs. Tiffany Peterson. I could almost hear the click as the bait was taken. Tiffany had walked right into the spotlight I had created for her. She had no idea the stage was rigged, and the lighting was about to get very, very hot. She believed she was about to stage her greatest social triumph. In reality, she was about to direct her own spectacular downfall. And I had written the script. With the trap in place, phase 2 of my plan commenced. This phase was all about information. Not for me, but for Mark. I needed to gently plant seeds of doubt in his mind, little breadcrumbs of truth that would lead him to his own conclusions. A direct assault wouldn't work, but a subtle campaign of whispers and questions just might. My opportunity came in the form of my 65th birthday. I knew Tiffany wouldn't allow the kids to come see me, and I wasn't even sure Mark would call. But I sent him a text. Mark, I'm not asking for a party. I know things are complicated, but it's my 65th birthday, and I would love it if my son would take me to lunch. Just us. Please. He agreed, probably out of a lingering sense of guilt. He picked a sterile chain bistro halfway between our houses, neutral ground. He was visibly nervous, checking his phone every few minutes, as if expecting Tiffany to text him instructions. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, sliding a gift bag across the table. It was a generic scented candle. Vanilla. My least favorite. "Thank you, honey. It's lovely," I said, forcing a smile. I decided to start with a soft touch. "So, I heard Tiffany is chairing the big school gala. That's a huge undertaking. I'm so impressed." Mark puffed up with pride. "Yeah, she's a natural. You should see her. She's got all these committees organized, delegating everything. The whole school is buzzing, especially with that huge anonymous donation on the line. They're calling it the Franklin Grant. Isn't that a nice coincidence?" I just nodded, my heart giving a little flutter at the mention of Frank's name. "It is. Well, with Tiffany's background in PR and marketing, I'm sure she'll hit that $100,000 goal with no problem." Mark took a sip of his iced tea. "Oh yeah, she's got it all under control. She's redesigning the whole look and feel of the event, calling it a night of 1,000 stars. Very classy." "That's wonderful. Did she ever show you the portfolio from her old firm? I bet she did some amazing campaigns. It would be fun to see the kind of work she used to do." He frowned slightly. I'm not sure I've ever seen it. She mentioned a big campaign for a luxury car brand once, but I guess we never really talked about the specifics. She says she doesn't like to live in the past." "Ah, of course, a forward thinker," I said, letting the subject drop. The first seed was planted, a tiny, insignificant question, but it was there. Next, I pivoted to her family. "How are her parents? I imagine they must be thrilled that she's running such a major event. Is their company sponsoring a table? Sterling Imports must do very well to have such a polished, successful daughter."
"Yeah, they're great. And, I think so," he mumbled, suddenly looking less certain. "I guess Tiffany handles all the sponsorships." "I'm just so curious about the import business," I continued, a picture of innocent fascination. "Is it complicated, dealing with customs and all that? I'd imagine your father-in-law has to be squeaky clean. I saw a news story a while back about some company that got into a whole mess importing knockoff designer goods. Can you imagine the scandal?" Mark paled. "Wow, no. Yeah, I'm sure Gerald runs a tight ship." But his eyes darted away. The second seed was planted. I had linked the idea of her father's business with the potential for scandal, forcing Mark to subconsciously connect dots he didn't even know existed. We finished the lunch with stilted small talk. He gave me a quick, awkward hug in the parking lot and practically sprinted to his car. It wasn't the birthday lunch I had dreamed of, but it was a tactical success. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. I had simply asked questions a normal mother-in-law might ask. But I knew I had given Mark's brain a few new puzzles to chew on. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I became a ghost. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't push. I just disappeared, letting the pressure I'd created do its work. But I wasn't idle. Carol, my wonderful gossipy friend, was my mole. She had a cousin on the gala's catering committee. The reports she brought back were priceless. Tiffany was in over her head, and it was starting to show. She was a dictator, not a leader. She alienated the other parent volunteers with her demands and condescending attitude. She had big ideas, but no idea how to execute them. She ordered ice sculptures in the shape of swans, but had forgotten to budget for the refrigerated platforms they'd need to sit on. She insisted on a specific type of French champagne that was 3 times the cost of the Prosecco they'd served last year. Ticket sales were sluggish, and major sponsorships weren't coming through. The $100,000 goal seemed impossibly far off. The night of 1,000 stars was shaping up to be a 5-watt bulb. Her dad's company didn't even buy a table, Carol reported with glee over coffee one afternoon. My cousin said Tiffany told the committee they had a conflict of interest, whatever that means. The other parents are starting to whisper. They're wondering if this big-shot marketing guru actually knows what she's doing. The pressure was mounting on Tiffany. I imagined her nights were sleepless, her days frantic. I knew my son, too. Mark hated conflict, but he also hated failure. He would be watching his wife's grand project start to flounder, and the questions I had planted in his mind would be starting to sprout. Was her resume really as impressive as she claimed? Was her family's business truly legitimate? Why weren't they stepping up to support her? My final move was the most delicate. The night before the gala, I wrote a check for $20,000. I made it out to the school. Then, I wrote a note on a simple, elegant card. It read, "To the gala committee. This donation is in honor of your wonderful chair, Mrs. Tiffany Peterson. a woman of her impressive background from the prestigious university and her time at the renowned PR firm is a gift to your community. She is a shining example for all of our children. Please use this to help you reach your goal. With deepest admiration, a friend of the Franklin Memorial Trust. I left the names of the university and the PR firm blank. I drove to the school after dark and slipped the envelope into the main office's mail slot. The next morning, the school's principal would find the check and the note. Overjoyed, she would immediately take it to Tiffany. And Tiffany would be faced with a dilemma. Here was a huge donation, a lifeline, pushing them closer to their goal. But it came with a note that referenced her fabricated past. She couldn't read it aloud without exposing her lies. She couldn't hide a $20,000 check, especially not when every dollar was being obsessively counted. She would have to explain it. She would have to lie, right there, to the principal and the committee. And that lie, I hoped, would be one too many. The night of the gala, I didn't go. That was never part of the plan. My role was complete. Instead, I put on my favorite pajamas, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in Frank's recliner. I pictured the scene. The rented tuxedos, the sequined dresses, the frantic energy of a fundraising thermometer stubbornly stuck at a disappointing number. And I pictured my son, Mark, watching his wife, the supposed marketing genius, squirm as her promises turned to dust. The curtain was about to rise on her final act. The quiet in the house that night was different. It wasn't the heavy, lonely quiet of grief. It was the calm, humming quiet of anticipation, like the moment between a flash of lightning and the roll of thunder. I had done everything I could. I had built the most intricate, delicate machine I could imagine, and all I could do now was wait to see if it would work. I must have dozed off in the recliner, because the ringing of the phone startled me awake. The clock on the mantel read 1:17 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. It could only be one person. I picked up the phone. Hello?
Mom? Mark's voice was a ragged whisper, hollowed out by exhaustion and something else, disillusionment. He sounded broken. Mark, are you okay? What happened? He let out a long, shaky breath. I'm at a hotel. I left her. The words landed with a quiet finality. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief so profound washing over me that I felt dizzy. Tell me everything, I said softly. And he did. He told me the whole sordid story from his perspective. He'd arrived at the gala full of nervous pride, wanting to support his wife, but he noticed the cracks immediately. The room was only half full. The volunteers looked stressed, avoiding Tiffany's gaze. The big fundraising thermometer, projected onto a screen, was stalled at a pathetic $42,000. He said Tiffany was frantic, her perfect smile stretched into a terrifying rictus. She kept snapping at the catering staff and making snide remarks about the cheap guests who weren't bidding on the silent auction items. Then, around 9 p.m., the school principal, a lovely woman named Mrs. Gable, approached Tiffany with a beaming smile, holding the envelope I had left. Mark was standing right there. He watched as Tiffany opened it, saw the check, and then read my note. He said the color drained from her face. She went white as a sheet. "This is wonderful, Tiffany," Mrs. Gable had gushed. $20,000? And what a lovely note from a friend of the Franklin Trust. Let me see. She'd reached for the card, but Tiffany had snatched it away, crumpling it in her fist. It's private," Tiffany had stammered. They wished to remain anonymous. "But the note mentioned your credentials," Mrs. Gable had insisted, still smiling. "We should announce it. It might inspire others.
Let's celebrate your amazing background." Mark said Tiffany started rambling. "No, that's not necessary. It's a simple donation. Let's just add it to the total." But her panic was obvious. The other committee members were looking at her strangely. The questions I had planted in Mark's mind began to roar. Her strange reaction to a note praising her past? It didn't make any sense unless the praise was unearned. On the drive home, the atmosphere in the car was glacial. The gala had been an unmitigated disaster. They hadn't even come close to the $100,000 goal, which meant the school lost out on my $500,000. Tiffany's reputation as a social and professional powerhouse was in tatters. She was blaming everyone but herself. The cheap parents, the incompetent volunteers, the tacky decorations. Finally, Mark couldn't take it anymore. He pulled the car over. "Tiffany, what was in that note?" he had asked her. "Nothing. It was just a note. Forget it." "No," he had said, his voice quiet but firm. "The principal said it mentioned your university and the PR firm. Why did you hide it? Why have I never seen a diploma or a portfolio or met a single coworker from your supposedly brilliant career?" The dam broke. The lies, cornered and exhausted, came pouring out. She confessed everything. That she'd flunked out of college, that the PR job was a fabrication. She tried to spin it, of course. She said she'd done it for him, to be the kind of woman she thought he deserved. But the spell was broken. Mark said it was like watching a beautiful statue crumble into dust right before his eyes. The woman he loved, the sophisticated partner he admired, wasn't real. She was an invention, a character she played. And when he finally asked her about her father's business, about the counterfeit goods, she flew into a rage. "What, did your sainted mother tell you that? That bitter old woman trying to turn you against me just because I asked for what was ours?" "It was never yours, Tiffany," Mark had told her, the realization dawning. "And you didn't just ask. You used my own children to blackmail my mother." He'd driven her home, packed a bag in silence while she hurled insults and threats at him, and left. And now he was in a sterile hotel room, his entire world turned upside down. I wasn't triumphant. Hearing the raw pain in my son's voice, I felt nothing but a mother's ache. "Oh, honey," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're not alone. I'm here." "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, and for the first time in years, he sounded like my little boy again. I was so blind. I let her... "Shh, it's over now," I said. "Get some sleep. Come home tomorrow. Just come home." The next day, around noon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mark standing on the porch. He looked tired and sad, but he also looked lighter. And behind him, peeking around his legs, were Emily and Josh. My breath caught in my throat. Emily's eyes met mine, and her face broke into a wide, beautiful smile. She ran forward and threw her arms around my waist, burying her face in my sweater. "Grandma, we missed you." Josh was right behind her. Clinging to my leg, I knelt, ignoring the creak in my knees, and wrapped them both in the biggest hug I could manage. I breathed in the scent of them, that wonderful kid smell of playground dirt and fruit snacks. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I looked up at Mark over their heads, and he was crying too. The family that had been broken was in this moment finally starting to heal. The pictures on the mantelpieces could just be pictures again. I had the real thing in my arms.
And the divorce was messy, as they always are. But Tiffany had no leverage. Her lies had cost her all her credibility. Mark, with the help of a very good lawyer Frank's estate paid for, was able to secure primary custody. Tiffany fought, of course, but a court-ordered psychological evaluation didn't do her any favors. It painted a picture of a woman with deep-seated insecurities and narcissistic tendencies. She ended up with supervised visitation twice a month. Her perfect world had shattered, and she couldn't lie her way back into it. She moved back in with her parents, and from what I hear, she's become a bit of a recluse. The queen of the suburbs had been dethroned. As for us, we're finding our way. Mark and the kids lived with me for a few months until they found a nice little house just a few blocks away. My days are filled with noise and laughter again, with homework help and baking cookies, and making a glorious mess with the flour, with building Lego towers just to see them crash. I'm using Frank's money the way I think he would have wanted. I set up ironclad college funds for Emily and Josh. I helped Mark start his own small woodworking business, something he'd always dreamed of doing but never had the confidence to pursue. And that $500,000 grant? I donated it to the school anyway, in Frank's name, with no strings attached. It built them a new science lab and a state-of-the-art computer center. Sometimes, when the kids are asleep and the house is quiet, I sit in Frank's office. I look at the family photos, the new ones, of all of us laughing at a barbecue last summer. I think about how a quiet, brilliant man's legacy was almost destroyed by a loud, shallow woman. And I think about how she underestimated the one person he'd spent his life with. She saw me as just a sweet old lady, a grieving widow, a soft touch. She forgot that for 42 years, I had loved an engineer. I learned from the best. I know how to spot a design flaw, and when I find one, I know exactly how to take it all apart, piece by painful piece, until the whole faulty structure comes crashing down.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!